Welcome back to the channel. Today we are taking a look at the Twistura Beta Flagship, a $119 single dynamic driver IEM with an 11mm glass diaphragm. Now personally, I don't really care what the diaphragm is made of as long as it sounds good, but glass is definitely an interesting choice. Also, quick note, it's called the Beta Flagship, even though it's not Twistura's most expensive IEM. A bit gimmicky, but it's just a name. The Beta comes in a surprisingly large box for an IEM, and the accessory package is pretty generous. You get 9 pairs of silicone tips across 3 types, 3 pairs of interchangeable nozzles, a magnetic purple leather case, a very thick modular copper cable, honestly feels more like a headphone cable. Even though there seems to be a huge vent on the top of the Beta, the isolation is actually quite good for an IEM with a large dynamic driver, completely usable on the go. It's slightly large, but comfort is very good and there's no driver flex. Let's talk about the sound now, but before we get into that, let me tell you more about the nozzles first, as that will change how you perceive the Beta. The Beta comes pre-installed with the gold nozzles, which I started listening on, and it was too bright for me. So after a few tracks, I switched to the silver nozzle, which Twistura calls the standard option, and is the most conservative in the treble. Interestingly, the differences between the nozzles are quite subtle, only a few decibels apart. The mesh and the damping material seems identical, and the main difference comes down to nozzle length and width. Even with the silver nozzle, the Beta still leans slightly bright, but not harsh. Overall, it's a mildly V-shaped tuning with a forward presentation. There's around an 8 dB bass boost, extending into the mid-bass. What really stood out to me is the sub-bass texture. There isn't a huge amount of bass, but the definition and speed are excellent in the bass. It doesn't rumble or sound boomy. Instead, it's tight, clean, and very well controlled. Not sure if that's due to the glass diaphragm, but it's not something I usually hear in sets at this price. Vocals are relatively neutral and slightly forward. They're smooth, but without the added warmth or thickness you often get from V-shaped sets. Treble is definitely on the brighter side, with good resolution. It has a natural decay and doesn't feel artificially sharpened or muted. To give you a better idea of how the Beta sounds, let's compare it to 2 similarly tuned IEMs, the Fosi IM4 and the EarAcoustic SPA Hi-End Max. The IM4 goes for $100 and the SPA goes for $290. They are all single dynamic driver IEMs. Starting with the bass, the Beta has the cleanest and leanest bass of the 3, but also the most resolving. The IM4 and SPA both have more mid-bass emphasis, which adds warmth to the overall presentation. In the mid-range, both the IM4 and SPA sound fuller and warmer than the Beta, but also slightly less forward. Between those two, the SPA has better mid-range resolution, though still behind the Beta. For treble, the Beta is the most aggressive. It can be fatiguing if you're treble sensitive or listen at higher volumes. That said, it also has the most emphasis on the decay. On the IM4 and SPA, the treble sounds a bit more muted, especially the IM4, which is the most laid back. Now, even though the IM4 and SPA may sound similar based on tuning, the biggest difference is actually soundstage. The IM4 sounds very intimate, almost wrapping around your head with limited depth. The SPA and Beta both offer a much larger soundstage, with better width and depth. This is where the IM4 clearly falls behind the other two. Overall, the Twistura Beta is a very strong performer for its price. Compared to other 2 similarly tuned single dynamic driver IEMs, I actually prefer it over the SPA and IM4, mainly due to its cleaner bass and more neutral mid-range. That said, it is still slightly bright for my taste. For long-term listening, I'd probably add a small piece of foam in the nozzle to tame the treble a bit. And while I don't agree with the Flagship naming in a broad sense, at $120, this is still a very capable and technical IEM. That's it for the video. Thanks for watching.